All right, I'm going to call, see, there it goes again. I'll call to order the February 27th, 2025 meeting of the Lexington Planning Commission. And the first item on our agenda is approval of the agenda. Do we have any anybody need something changed? No? Okay. Arnie, we need a motion for this?
Yes. the
Yeah.
Approval agenda. Yes, you do.
Yep. So
I move that the agenda be accepted.
I second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, and motion carries. Approval of the minutes from the February 13th, 2025 meeting of the Planning Commission. They looked very thorough to me. I did not have any changes. Does anybody else have any comments or? Okay, then I will have a motion.
I move that we accept the minutes as presented.
I second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And motion carries. Okay, next is citizens' comments on matters not on the agenda. So first I'd like to say thank you to all of you who came. We are delighted to have so many people from the public who have come out to participate in this process. So thank you for coming. So citizens' comments on matters not on the agenda are specifically things that we're not already talking about. So if anybody has any comments they would like to make on something not on the agenda, please come on up, state your name, make your comment. Okay, seeing as there is nobody, I will close that section of the agenda and move on to new business. So the first item is ECCOA 2025-03, an application by Scott Hazlett for approval of a certificate of appropriateness for new signage for Sunrise Barbecue at 535 East Nelson Street, tax map number 30-1-9, owned by Andorra Properties LLC. Arnie, can we have a staff report?
Certainly, we do have one correction. The actual address is 465 East Nelson Street.
Okay.
So we do have a request for a projecting sign and two freestanding sign panels for the Sunrise Diner located at 465 East Nelson Street. The parcel is in the commercial shopping center C2 zoning district and in the entrance quarter overlay. The request includes a 3.5 by 3.5 projecting sign made of a digitally printed PVC material with a black aluminum frame to be mounted at an angle to the building facade and a double-sided internally illuminated 6.5 inch by 1 1.25 foot sign panel for the freestanding multi-tenant sign adjacent to East Nelson Street. You do have graphics in the application. So the bottom of the page, you see the the aerial view of the shopping center, and this is towards the back of the shopping center. It does not have frontage that faces onto East Nelson Street. And you see pictures of that rear portion on the next page, and then also a picture of the existing freestanding multi-tenant sign that's out front. And there are two panels that are proposed for that particular freestanding sign. Perhaps helpful also is to flip over into the application on page 17 as an example, or even on page 16, the sign that they would like to hang. Typically we see projecting signs hung at a 90-degree angle or perpendicular to the building. They actually would like to put it at a bit of an angle, not all the way out to 90 degrees. I think somewhere around 20 degrees, if I remember correctly. And that way it's a little bit easier to see as you're coming into the shopping center from the Walker Street side. So as you're sort of driving by Dollar General store and whatnot, you would have a straight on angle to this particular sign. And that's shown in the graphic on the next page, which is page 18, where the wall is at the top part and you're looking sort of on plan view down and you see the angle of the bracket, and then that front part is the depiction of the sign itself. So that's a little bit unusual. Typically projecting signs are 90 degrees, but this one's a little bit different. Happy to answer any questions.
Is it just these two signs, or is there, so the current signage has one sign over the door and then one sign to the left of the door sort of on a wall? Are those
I will let
Oh,
the applicant answer
right.
that, but my understanding is we have one sign panel that will be at the projecting sign. And then we have two sign panels for the multi-tenant sign up front. And then perhaps Jamie can explain what's happening with what I presume is the temporary signage that you see in the photographs.
Right. Well, these are for the Sunrise Diner that's already there. I'm sorry? I think it's changing the name. Right, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Arnie?
I can't quite picture how that sign hangs, so can you show us how it's supposed to hang, or maybe the applicant can show us that?
If this were the wall,
Yeah.
the bracket would be sort of like that.
Oh,
So it's
okay.
at about,
Okay.
as opposed to being at a 90-degree, it'd be about 20. So again, it's got a better sight line
Okay.
to that Walker Street side of the property.
Thank you for the clarification.
Okay, if we could have, is our applicant here? Yeah, come on up. State your name and address for the record, please.
Howdy, I'm Jamie Gooden. I live at 202 Miller Street in Lexington. I'm here representing Scott Hazlett. Thank you for your service. Any questions?
Yes, well, I'll ask you the question that I had, which is, are there going to be additional signs to these two signs?
From what Scotty has told me, those were temporary signs as he was in the process of getting this new sign through the works. They've been up for quite some time, but that's how it goes sometimes.
Right, and is he planning on leaving those there?
Don't believe so.
Okay, so there's not going to be any sign on over the sort of entrance area at all, identifying it as an entrance?
I guess whatever we need to remove, we will remove, but only that.
That wall sign that's going to go up is pretty darn close to the entrance. So perhaps they feel that they don't need to have a specific entry type sign.
Okay, and so but the other sign's going to go away, the one over to the left.
We do have limitations on how long a temporary sign can
Right.
be displayed.
Right, okay. All right, does anybody else have any questions for Mr. Gooden?
I do have one. Did the owner of the property, did they have any requirements for sign color scheme or anything like that?
No, ma'am, not to my knowledge. As you can see in the application, they signed off on it. So
So I'll have another question, which is on this on the sign, the main sign for Rockbridge Square. The sign is going to be white. Are the other signs, I'm not sure whether I'm asking you, Jamie, or Arnie, are these other like ugly dugs on page 21? Do those have a white background?
I think it's just a photograph that
Yeah.
was taken that's showing it in more of a tan color, but I think they're all white.
Okay.
from what I recall. And then Kate's photograph pretty much shows that on page 8.
Right. Okay, anybody else have any questions? Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
And I'll now open the public comment section for this item on the agenda. Does any member of the public have any comments that they would like to make about this particular sign? Okay, closing public comment. Do we have an opening the section for commission discussion? Any thoughts? Concerns?
My one little observation, I guess. On page 9, it says the applicable zoning district sections. And it says here, list general office, but we're not putting an office here. So should that,
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry. That was an oversight, probably a cut and paste thing from us. Correct.
so what
A
should it read?
restaurant is still a by right use in the C2 zoning
Okay,
district.
okay. Just checking. Thank you.
So are you going to make a change to that then, Arnie? Does that need to have a change?
Restaurant?
It's been changed, but you all do the approval of this. So even if that's not correct, you can still make your motion and go forward. It's not as though these are, sorry, what I should say is COAs are not advertised. So there was no misadvertisement or any issue. You can still move forward with an approval.
Okay. Anybody else? Thank you for catching that. All right, then I will entertain a motion.
I move to approve the entrance corridor certificate of appropriateness application EC COA 2025-03 for new signage for Sunrise Barbecue at 465 East Nelson Street as proposed by the applicant.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And opposed? And the motion carries. If you'll take that news back to Mr. Hazlett. Okay, moving on to the next item on the agenda under new business, conditional use permit 2025-03, an application by John Adamson for approval of a conditional use permit to allow portions of the building located at 1 South Main Street, tax map number 23-1-70, to be used as an educational facility, college/university. Arnie, can we have a staff report?
If I may, can I read into the record or our public policy comments just for making comments during a public meeting?
Yes, please do.
Okay. Since we don't have such participation very often, we do have a list of comments and behaviors policy. So as an example, this is a time designated for regular planning commission. Speakers must sign up on the sign up sheet at the entrance to the room prior to the meeting. Speaker must be recognized by the chair and then state his or her name and address to the clerk. The maximum time allotted for each speaker is 3 minutes. Brevity is appreciated. A speaker may only speak one time per meeting. Individuals may not yield their allotted 3 minutes to another person. Speakers must address commissioners only and must not engage with the audience. The chair may direct appropriate staff to later respond to any questions posed by a speaker. Individuals representing a group are allotted 5 minutes per comment period. The speaker must only cover topics that directly pertain to the public hearing item. There is no time limit for the total amount of public comment during a public hearing. However, speakers are required to comment within a 3-minute individual limit. And if you prefer, Kate can keep that 3-minute interval if you.
I think that would be very helpful. So just to recap, if you would like to speak in the public comment section about this issue, please do sign up. The sign up sheet is over on the table over there. And Kate is going to keep us on schedule for 3 minutes per comment. Okay, so staff report.
We do have an application for a conditional use permit to allow portions of the Grand Building located at 1 through 9 South Main Street, located in the C1 zoning district, to be used as an educational facility, college, university use. You see the photograph of the front of the building there on the bottom of your first page of your staff report. The applicant is requesting conditional use permit to allow educational facility use in portions of the Grand Building. The request is specifically to allow the basement level of the building under the Main Street storefronts and the portion of the building behind the Main Street storefronts and above the Washington Street storefront to be occupied by W&L office and a copy room. Both of these spaces will be accessed from the rear of the building, and neither will have street level access from either Main or Washington streets. The request does not include the portions of the main building, so that the main level of the building facing and access from Main Street or from Washington Street. Those primary public facing spaces will be occupied by retail uses permitted by right in the central business district. And we do have a graphic on page 30 that represents that, and happy to answer any questions about that graphic. It's an unusual building. It's a split level in 2 different ways. So we have 2 levels and then 2 levels. So you're always doing sort of a half set of stairs to get to the other level.
Mhm. Yeah, I have a question about that drawing on page 30.
Okay.
I assume that this is an accurate detail of how much of the building is in retail?
Mhm.
Okay. So more than half of the first floor or that Main Street floor.
I believe so. The applicant can speak to square footage. But yes, it certainly looks from that graphic that more than half of that main level would be remaining as retail space.
Okay. And the retail 3 street access, would that be below grade?
No, because the grade falls along West Washington Street,
Yeah,
and because of the way, again, the half levels work out inside the building, there is an opportunity for the owner to cut in a new storefront along Washington Street.
Mhm.
In that space that is labeled as Retail 3 Street Access. So that would be a new retail space.
right. I'm just wondering about, so the height wise, it would be like the door would have to be on the downhill side, I'd assume.
He's got it figured out exactly where the door can be located to meet the sidewalk. And
Yeah,
that-
okay.
But it does work out.
All right.
And
Anybody?
the ARB will be reviewing that at
Yeah,
their meeting
Of
next week.
course. Um, did you have anything else?
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Now, over on page 24 of your packet, we have the definition there of an educational facility, college, university. You've seen this, I think, 3 times already. The pertinent part is that this term includes academic buildings and administrative facilities. Actually, that's the pertinent part. So the copy center and the offices, we have deemed those to be administrative facilities, which is part of the educational facility, college, university use. And that use requires a conditional use permit in this zoning district. So that's why we had the request this evening for those 2 portions of the building to have a conditional use permit applied to them. You are asked to evaluate the proposal presented by the applicant in accordance with the zoning ordinance provisions and in accordance with the guidelines provided in the comprehensive plan. Please follow the criteria for evaluating conditional use permits on pages 24 and 25 for the requested conditional use permit, as you do for all CUP requests. It may also help guide your discussion if you consider each of the 5 criteria individually, as you did for the CUP request for the Rockbridge building. Your evaluation of the requested uses against these established criteria should be the basis for your recommendation this evening. You are specifically being asked to evaluate a copy center located in the basement, along with an office use in the upper rear portion of the old Grands building. Stating preferences for uses other than the requested copy center and office uses is unhelpful unless there's a specific support for that particular use in the zoning ordinance or in the comprehensive plan. We also ask that you please focus on the use and not the user. Assessing the impacts of a W&L related office use, for example, should be no different than assessing the impacts from a regular office use. The C1 zoning district does not require off-street parking spaces be provided, and the subject parcel should be treated similarly to all other parcels in the C1 zoning district. As we mentioned during our last discussion, it's really an infrastructure or a facility that the city is providing. So the city is providing public parking spaces on street and in parking lots in downtown. And that's why C1 zoning district does not have an off-street parking requirement. Going back to the conditions that you have on page 24, I won't go over all 4 of those or 5 of those because you have A, B, C, and D. And then you also have a little bit in number 3 that follows that, unless you have any questions specifically about those.
My one little question would be, in section 3 there, what it says relevant to the findings required by subsection C1 and 2. We don't have C2 here. What does
Sure.
that state,
I
please?
cut that out because it's extra. It has to do with parking.
Okay.
So therefore I don't provide you with the entire section, but the rest of that is really the important part, as well as to any other reasonable land use and zoning considerations as may be required by the nature of the proposed use. So you have A, B, C, and D, and then you have that sort of catch-all or any other reasonable land use and zoning considerations. While conditional uses are considered to have a potentially greater impact upon neighboring properties or the public than those uses permitted by right, conditions must be reasonable and address an impact expected from the proposed use. Additionally, conditions developed to address an expected impact must be proportionally related to the impacts resulting from the use. Staff does recommend the 2 conditions you see there. Those are really just sort of locational, trying to determine which portions of the building, if this is approved, where that would be allowed. So the first one, for example, is that only the basement level below the Main Street storefronts and that portion of the building behind the Main Street storefronts and above the Washington Street storefront may be utilized for administrative facilities related to the educational facility, college, university use. And the second recommended condition is that the storefronts facing Main Street and Washington Street are not subject to this conditional use permit. We did receive 3 comments over the last 2 days, and staff provided those to you. One is comments from Patrick Ramey, from Crystal DeMott, and from Tina Miller. That's all I have for a presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Anybody have any questions for Arnie? Okay, we will move on to our applicant statement. You'll come up and state your name and address for the record.
Okay, thank you for your time. John Adamson.
And if I could get you to speak, yeah, exactly,
John
so that
Adamson.
everybody can hear you.
No problem.
Thank you.
Happy to answer any questions. It's a pretty complicated building because of the 4 different levels, which made it sort of a unique development challenge, trying to figure out how do we have accessible retail from Main Street. There was an opportunity we discovered to cut in the new retail from Washington Street. So that's what's been proposed. But again, happy to answer any questions. I don't want to take any extra time that's unnecessary.
Could you answer the question that I had about where on Washington Street the access door would be?
And make it, John, speak into the microphone so everybody can hear and
No
it'll be
problem.
on
Is
the
that better?
record. That'd be good. Thank you.
Great. So on Washington Street, there's a block of space approximately halfway down the building is where there's a step up and a step down because of the split level. So the opportunity to create that storefront is the back half of the building, which would be on theoretically the west side. Is that clear?
West side?
Um,
Oh,
Side.
the
okay,
north
downhill side. Okay.
And there's presently an application in the ARB that has a graphic of what that elevation would look like.
And is that storefront, it looks on this graphic like it's going halfway back into the building, halfway north? No, south.
That's accurate. So because that area is below grade with no real accessible area, there's a little pocket behind it that we need access to get to that subgrade level, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So with where the bearing conditions in the building are and trying to right size retail, this provides an opportunity here for about, I don't know, 1,500 square feet plus or minus
Okay.
off of Washington Street.
And would there be access from the back of that retail space?
There would not. So just on the retail, just like we're on the front, everything's coming in and out the front doors or the side.
Okay, and one of the letters that we received had questions about whether the existing retail space would have ADA improvements made to them. I just thought I'd see what you were thinking about that.
So that's part of the effort, right? Because the split level, there's no real reasonable way to get a ramp long enough to access that back space. And with the opportunity of trying to right size retail, let's say plus or minus less than 2,000 feet per space, we feel that there's an opportunity to cut in new storefronts off of Main Street that would be at different levels. One would have an internal ramp that would access the floor level. And so each space would be self-contained without having to have a shared vestibule that doesn't work very well.
And does that mean, so I'm thinking about ladles and linens, are you thinking that you're going to remove the steps in the back that go up to the upper level in the back?
Well, that is the back portion. So it's everything in front of that. But because there's an internal stairway and because there's a temporary sort of construction wall up that opens the space up more than it presently feels like it is. But because of the way the building was constructed in 1950, the storefront was mid-century modern, stepped back with a canopy. When they came in with grand furniture, they put a brick facade up, encapsulating that canopy. Well, interestingly, the sidewalk was cast in place so there was finished space underneath the sidewalk in the basement level,
Mhm.
which presents grade level issues with where the floor meets. So you stare at the storefronts are elevated and flush with the glass. But inside the actual floor is lower. Again, this is just part of the complexity of how do we come in off Main Street and create not only a footpath, but also an accessible with modern ramp standards to get to that level. And we've come up, I feel like, with a nice solution. And that has been presented in an ARB package for next week.
Okay, so you're saying that there are going to be some fairly major renovations in the retail spaces as well then? Is that what I'm hearing?
Correct, to support retail, just to be clear.
Yeah.
And it's all about accessibility because the shared vestibule where two
Right.
businesses have to share the same space is clumsy at best.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Does anybody else have any questions? Sorry, I didn't mean to monopolize.
Just to clarify that the access for the offices will be coming from the back, then not anywhere from the retail. All the employees' offices will be entering this back part, the dark blue part. Is that correct in the picture?
So in a previous application, for the Rockbridge building, because it's an old historic building, modern connections, stairs, elevator, bathrooms, etc., are harder to retrofit in buildings and keep the Department of Historic Resources for historic tax credits and those sort of things happy. So we've referred to that space as a spine space, but we're like literally connecting 8 different floor levels trying to tie all this together.
Mhm.
So theoretically, there's an entrance that would connect to a hallway that would sort of take you back, but you come into a vestibule, up a ramp and around a corner. Like it's not front spacing, if that makes any sense.
Understood. Mhm.
So we have designed it so the main entry for that space would come in off the back.
The back.
And
Mhm.
then all of the retail facing space would be,
All in the front.
and really what this plan affords is all of the prime spaces in this building are being left for Main Street or Washington Street retail. Like we really do view this as giving spaces that are sized appropriately for businesses in town to be successful and to thrive. And we're taking space below and above and behind and using that to support what we're trying to deliver on the front.
Do you have a tenant for this right now? Is W&L going to be your tenant?
For the lower level copy center, they would like to use the basement level that is unused, right?
Right.
There's not a tenant for the above and behind. I just was asking just because it would be nice to be able to sort of infill that space.
Okay.
The retail tenants, I do not. So in a public forum, this is maybe less comfortable, but the tenants that moved out of the Rockbridge building and into the Grand building, I wasn't sure what we were doing in the Grand building and how that would sort of work out. Now that all this is coming to focus and the level of construction that has to happen to update the sprinkler system and to get the accessibility, those users are planning, at least one for sure, and I hope the second, to go back into the Rockbridge building. That will certainly be their opportunity and their choice. And that will decamp the Grand building to make these updates. And those specific users have not been identified for those 3, but they will be retail users that hopefully Main Street can help me identify, or new businesses that are coming in new spaces. They're going to be very nice prime spaces, but they're not identified at this point.
Okay. And then I'm just going to apologize. I should have said this at the beginning because I didn't realize there was a tenant, that W&L was a tenant. I do have a personal interest in W&L and that my husband works for W&L, but I do not have a conflict where I can still participate in this because it is not just a issue between the city and W&L.
So, and I might add, so the copy center use for that lower sort of basement space, I don't know how else the space gets used. I think someone said in some correspondence recently, it was a mattress display, where you went in and went down a set of stairs and down another set of stairs. It's not very friendly, accessible space. So it really is, from a landlord standpoint, an optimal use for that type of thing that's kind of out of sight, out of mind, and really helpful. So I just hope you'll see favor in helping me with this application.
And the copy center, the space that you're interested in for the copy center, that is accessible by the elevator, I assume, in the spine.
Now, Theoretically, no, actually, it's accessible from the back parking lot space. And there's a concrete ramp that we've kind of thought through for accessibility to that lower level.
Okay.
And that concrete ramp is what accesses you, or a set of stairs,
Okay. Okay.
but
And-
not the other.
And I just want to make sure I really fully understood. So you're talking about renting the backspace to WNL and also the copy center, just making sure.
Well, so, a predominant amount of the space that comes off Washington Street will come off of that retail user. There is a portion that comes on, and there's an adjacent building, the Clover Building, right?
Yeah.
That comes in pretty decent ways off of Washington Street. And then there's a small pocket of space between there and where the stair tower goes out.
Mhm.
That would create an accessible entry to get into that back center, but it is now at this point around the corner. It is tucked in and behind.
Right, but that's not my question. I just want to make sure that we're talking about
Yes, there's
Washington and
there-
Lee.
There's a space there. There would be a connection to that lower basement space through that to make all these connections work. That is correct.
Also not my question. I just want to confirm that we are talking about Washington and Lee renting the office space and the the copier space
Basement. right.
in the basement. Both of those.
So I want to make sure that I'm trying to be clear with you also. So the lower space, yes, the upper space is undetermined.
Okay.
And I'm trying to have an opportunity, if there's an opportunity, because I'm trying to figure out how else we use that space.
Mhm.
We floated lots of concepts and ideas, but the ask is to come here one time in total, because previously when we came, we didn't have a full vision in place.
Right.
And now that we figured out how we're accessing these retails and what really is available, I
Mhm.
can come wholeheartedly and say, here's the final vision. This is why it's being presented to you in this way.
Okay. So you do not have Washington and Lee is not your tenant right now. Isn't it? You don't have an
Space
agreement
above
with
and
them.
behind.
I'm for a
The
behind.
space above and behind,
Yes.
above the Washington Street level. That is correct.
Um, do we need to do this in order? I'm just wondering whether, certainly for the copy center, because you're talking with them specifically about the copy center, correct?
Correct.
So that is clear to me that we want to address that. I'm just wondering whether we want to address the office space, if there's some question about whether Washington and Lee would be your tenant.
The request is from the property owner to consider both of those. I would recommend you consider both of those.
And I would say that if that doesn't come to fruition within 2 years, it goes away.
Yeah.
So that could be the condition of the use, that if, that there is that window and then there's a sunset, and then it would force me to come back
How many offices are you planning?
in that space.
Yeah.
Right now, there's no idea, because there's no
Okay.
concept of a plan. for
Okay,
that.
you haven't gotten that far
Right
yet.
now, it's just a open space with windows that we're proposing through the air being to cut through in Washington.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions?
I don't know if John can answer this or not, but where does WNL have a copy center at this point?
That I can't tell you the exact building, but I can tell you it's across Lee Avenue. Fronting Washington Street, sort of maybe behind Evans or near Evans or somewhere in that general vicinity.
Okay.
What exactly is a copy center? Is it not talking about a Kinko's? We're talking,
Sort of like that. I mean, those
So it
big,
would
those
be-
big paper processors.
but would students be accessing this space?
That's a question that I should know the answer to, and I do not know the answer, but I would say that it is a local resource. I understand that community members are able to use the space as well. And that's just come from people within the university. So I don't know. The nice thing is, if it's in that general quadrant of Lee and Washington, if you don't know what's there, then that's a good sign for what we're asking for, given where it is and what it is.
Did you say that community members can use the copy center?
I've heard that.
Okay.
I don't work for the school, but I've heard that there's not another copy center locally, so I've understood that they've been whether it's written or unwritten. It's just been generous with that resource.
I know that some local businesses do use it. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm happy.
Okay. All righty. So now we are going to open the floor for public comments about this item on the agenda. We have a number of people who have signed up. Do I need to read out their names, their addresses, or should they?
You just want to call them up as you go through
You
the
got
list and they can provide their names and address.
Okay. So first on our list is Jeff Hughes. Come on up. And if you'll state your name and address for the record.
Jeff Hughes, and I reside on Jacob's Ladder in the county. Our family owns a retail business on Main Street in Lexington. I also serve as the chair of the design committee for Main Street, Lexington. I'm deeply committed to the improvement and viability of downtown Lexington. I've served with Main Street for several years. I'm speaking tonight solely in my personal capacity and not speaking for Main Street, Lexington. I strongly support the conditional use permit for this location. Thoughtful and sensitive rehabilitation of our historic buildings is critical to preserving Lexington's character while ensuring that downtown remains a thriving, functional, and safe space for business and residents. I've personally experienced what happens when buildings are left to deteriorate. Our business is currently housed in a dilapidated hundreds-year-old structure with leaking plumbing, decaying exterior, no fire suppression, no modern safety features. Recently, last month, we suffered a devastating flood, which put us out of our space for over 34 days. And we lost significant revenue and were not able to serve our customers. The building is apparently owned by an out-of-town investor who either can't or won't maintain it, even to basic standards. That's my opinion. This is what happens when buildings are neglected. And it's a stark contrast to what's being proposed tonight. Mr. Anderson's project is exactly the kind of investment we need downtown instead of an empty, outdated structure. This restoration will bring the building up into modern safety standards, create 3 new Class A retail spaces, which will ensure it remains a viable and contributing part of Lexington. Mr. Anderson has proven that this project, like his others, will be safe, functional, and built to last. Lexington has a long history of destructive fires that have wiped out entire blocks. Many of our older buildings remain at risk, lacking proper fire suppression and safety features. The southern end fire should remind us how close we came to losing an entire block of our historic downtown. The work being done now, including this location, ensures that future fires and disasters won't wipe out an irreplaceable part of our town. I understand concerns about Washington and Lee leasing space or one group taking the lead in these restorations, but what is the alternative? More absentee landlords who let buildings decay until they become unsafe and unusable? We already see what's happening when owners neglect their properties. It hurts all of us. We should be encouraging responsible investment that protects our historic structures while making them functional for modern needs. In 100 years, we will all be gone. But with care and effort, our historic core may look much as it does today. New tenants, whether they are businesses, professionals, or university offices, bring life and economic energy to downtown. A thriving, occupied building is always better than an empty, decaying one. The choice is clear. We can either allow our historic downtown to deteriorate or not be put to best use, or we can support projects like this that preserve our heritage while making Lexington a better place to live and do business. I strongly urge the Planning Commission to approve this conditional use permit. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for your time. All right. Thank you, Arnie. Next on the list is Patrick Ramey. Come on up and state your name and address, please. And speak into that microphone so we can all hear you.
Patrick Ramey, 110 White Street. I was able to move some things to join you tonight. I already contacted you about the enormous amount of square footage that was available from the street and will be no longer according to this plan. But I want to talk to you a moment about the plain text of the city zoning code and the comprehensive plan. There's enormous amount of square footage being removed. A reduction in supply increases the price. You don't have to have a PhD in economics to know that. And so whose prices go up when you have a reduction in supply in either commercial or residential space? People who live and run businesses in the city. That violates the CUP conditions 421.111B, that you should not be making CUPs that violate the public welfare. This then ties into the comprehensive plan. You should not 1.1.11C conflict with the policies and principles of the comprehensive plan. So what does the comprehensive plan say about this? Well, it specifically says that WNL should be encouraged to stay within their institutional boundaries. Why? Quote, to preclude any further loss of local business and industry, not retail specifically, but business and industry. They understood this in 2020. There's also a whole section on housing, and like most of my downtown, upstairs spaces, backside spaces are often used as housing spaces, and it is a priority of the city council to increase the availability of housing, which does not happen if WNL gobbles up space for administrator offices or copy centers. So the appropriate course of action, if you believe that offices are a by right use and it doesn't matter who the user is, then you need to change the zoning code to reflect that. This shouldn't be a CUP. It should be a by right use. If it doesn't matter, that's WNL. Just change the zoning code. Furthermore, you need to change the comprehensive plan. If you don't care that WNL is doing this, if it's fine, regardless of the use, then you need to strike those sections of the comprehensive plan. There's a process here for a reason. Now, regardless of how you decide tonight, if I'm going to be cynical for a moment, as I've been prone to do, I don't necessarily think it matters what you do tonight, because the Washington and Lee dependents on city council and the mayor will vote for it anyway, just like they did the last time. But I sat where you sat. I'm the only person who was part of the revision of the zoning code from the beginning to the end. So I know it pretty well. And I would simply ask, why waste your time if you can't just follow the clear language of the law? Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. All right, next item, next person on the list is Donna Schick. Come on up and state your name and address into the microphone,
My name
please.
is Donna Schick. I live at 3 Sheridan Row here in Lexington. Sheridan Row is right off Main Street. I am very fortunate in that I can walk to all of the downtown shops. There are many people who cannot, and parking in this town is very difficult. I understand this application says you should not consider parking. What I am saying is that space that's set aside for administrative use has a much higher concentration of people working in it than retail space. That's going to be a lot more people competing for parking spaces in downtown. There's a proposal now to remove 2 parking spaces from Main Street already directly across from this building, or diagonally across. And I think this does negatively impact downtown. I think it negatively impacts the businesses. I've spoken to many of my friends who live out of town, and they tell me that when they come into town, if they cannot conveniently find parking, they just keep going. And businesses are losing business. As someone who loves this town, the city, and lives in downtown, it's important to me that it remains vibrant. I don't think Mr. Addison's proposal is in some ways it is positive for downtown and rehabbing the building, bringing it up to code, but bringing in administrative space brings a higher concentration than retail space would of people who work there. And that will negatively impact parking. And I think parking for visitors, for tourists, for people who live outside of town who want to come shop downtown is critical. And things that limit parking to them are going to drive them away. And I think we have to think about that. I think about it when I hear it from my friends. Again, I'm lucky. I walk to everything, but most people don't. So I know it says not to consider it, but I think we have to start looking at things that impact our businesses and people being able to come into town and park does. I have private parking where I live, but I find people parking in my parking all the time or blocking me in because they want to run in for a quick errand and there's no place to park. It's annoying to me, but I'm not causing somebody to lose business because people can't park. So I just wanted to say that because I think it does negatively impact local business and quality of life in downtown. The people who want to come here just drive by because they can't park. And it's the fact that it's administrative space, and that's a higher concentration of people who are going to compete for parking. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next on the list is Michael Perry, is it? State your name and address, please.
My name is Michael Perry. I live at 309 South Jefferson. And you've seen me before this commission talking against the CUP for Mr. Adamson to allow more W&L creep into downtown. I second all the sentiments that the last two speakers addressed. I do want to applaud Mr. Adamson for the development of the buildings that he does do. And I applaud the fact that he's interested in keeping retail space in downtown. I am concerned again, the rumors of one of those retail spaces being taken over by W&L for a bookstore or some sort of store of that type. Having W&L offices in downtown is counterproductive to economic development. We could have businesses in those offices that, generate sales tax, business taxes, bring more people into town for various reasons, rather than administrators of a university that has a large building right across the street from the Grand Building, has plenty of space on their campus. The only reason why they want to have offices downtown is because it is cheaper to renovate and rent a building downtown than build a new building on their campus. It is one of the largest endowed universities, small universities in the United States. It has billions of dollars in endowments and certainly can afford to have offices on their campus without coming in and taking space away from economic development in downtown. The parking, again, is another issue. Rental increases is W&L can afford to pay whatever rent is asked of them, and they will. And that cuts out the little guy who wants to have some sort of shop or office in downtown from being able to afford to be in downtown. I also have another objection with the conflict of interest of Mrs. Strine on this matter. I still, and I said this before City Council, that she has direct influence and direct connection to W&L, and she should recuse herself of any matters concerning W&L. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next on the list is Jessica Dugan. Jessica Dugan. Please state your name and address for the record.
Sure. I'm Jessica Dugan. I live at 6 Junkin Place and I currently work at 18 West Washington. And to piggyback on what Michael was saying, I am that little guy. I have a small business and it's a thriving business, and I serve Washington and Lee employees, VMI staff, and the local community in my psychotherapy practice. And I think my struggle with this conversation today is the idea that only W&L will pay these rates, because we don't know what those rates are. I have been looking for new office space for months, can't find it. And I would love to know what these office space opportunities would be, where I could have my clients walking from their place of business during the middle of the workday and come see me. That is very advantageous, but I do not want to be on a storefront. I also live here. I want it to be a vibrant town. I appreciate the efforts in making more retail space. I also really appreciate the preservation of the buildings. My office actually looks at the one you're doing right now. And although it's sometimes a racket, I really appreciate what they're doing and the value of that. But and as someone who lives here, and works here, my request as someone who works here is give us a chance to say, no, we won't pay that rent. And as someone who lives here, my sense of the community is, what is the plan here? Like, I hear words of a comprehensive plan, but I don't feel it in the community. It doesn't feel like people know where we're going. And I feel just really concerned that, that courthouse space is beautiful, but it's dead. It's just office space. And like, I would love to see more vibrancy there, but it's W&L. So I feel concerned about that. And my request would be, I don't even know, like, do I want you to preserve buildings? Yes. Do I want you to add retail space? Yes. Do I necessarily want that back space to be W&L? No. So I guess I'm sort of kind of against it. And would hope that there would be more opportunities for people like me to have good space downtown.
Thank you very much for your comments. Next on our list is Tina Miller. Come up, state your name and address, please.
Tina Miller, and I live at 52 Liberty Lane, Natural Bridge, Virginia, but I do have an adjacent building. I got the letter that I own in downtown Lexington. I just wanted to start, a lot of things have already been stated, and I also sent a letter because I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to be here this evening. But if you drive on North Main Street, it used to be businesses and buildings that were occupied on North Main Street. It's now VMI's, big athletic buildings and things like that. If you drive down West Nelson Street, when I was a kid, West Nelson Street was covered, it was all houses and things like that. That is now all W&L. When you go down Lee Street, that used to be houses on Lee Street. It is all now, pretty much. A little bit, but most of it's W&L as well on Lee Street, if you look all the way across. On Washington Street now, we have got, on, I don't know my sides, but of course, the fraternities and everything that we've got on Washington Street. On Nelson Street, the old Press Brown building is now W&L. The Cutting Edge building, I don't know what's going to happen with that, but, it's right next to the space, the old Press Brown space, so what I see is this creep happening into the town with Washington and Lee. And Washington and Lee is a wonderful, and VMI, both of the universities are wonderful assets to the town. But as both of them seem to gobble up the town, we have all the issues that are presented here already. And so, yes, the storefronts are planned for the front of these buildings, but I just feel like the creep of the universities in taking up all this backfill space. Like you said, you've only got so much space in downtown Lexington. It's finite. And so as you use up every square foot, that's less for locals to use. Locals, if W&L is taking up, and they have plenty of money, they have acres and acres and acres. If you go out west on 60, they own a ton of land. They could build there versus encroaching more and more on the town. And then you can't go back. Once it's gone, it's gone. Yes, we could say maybe it could change back or whatnot. But at this point, if it's moved, and then there's this random space that we don't know, but we're going to go ahead and get approval for to use as W&L office space if they so become the tenants. Come on, we all realize that would probably happen. And then also we're already having storefronts, like for example, that prime storefront space that's being taken over by the entranceway, which I didn't even realize the last time I was here, for the Rockbridge building, I guess, and the elevators. That is it's just gotten boarded up, I guess, yesterday and today. Beautiful part of the windows. Grand Furnishings was a huge retail space. And the thing about this is any of those spaces that no longer can have businesses, all that money from the sales tax from Grand, that was all three levels. All three levels were space. I bought mattresses at that space. So I was there and I bought several there. So that's taxpayer money that we're not going to get, or tax money we're not going to get. But then also, what about all the businesses, the engineers, the this, the that, the counseling services, the other businesses that would be attracting people to come downtown that can no longer be there? Is that my time?
That's your
Okay.
timer.
Okay, so they can't be there either. So that's more tax revenue as well.
Thank you for
Thank
your comments. Last person on the list is Niall Wolf. Sorry if I got your name wrong.
It's Nan Wolf, Nancy Wolf, 303.5 South Jefferson Street, Lexington. I just want to second everything that Patrick said, particularly the aspects of paying attention to what's already on the books. There's a reason, and I sat on where you're sitting now too. And there's a reason why we have, planning. There's a reason we have a comprehensive plan. And all I ask you to do is pay attention to that, because I think we all appreciate what's been done, by people like Mr. Adamson, who come in and renovate these buildings. Without their help, this town would be in trouble. But we also are desperate for housing, and we also cannot afford to lose retail. So that's my.
Thank you so much. All right, that's all I've got on this list. If there's anybody else, last opportunity. All right, I'm closing public comment and opening up commission discussion and decision, we hope. Okay. Thoughts, fellow commissioners?
I have to really weigh in on the side of the comprehensive plan being very well thought out, being very well crafted. And there's a reason that that was done. And I think it's an affront to the people that spent all the time crafting that if we totally throw it out the window. And that's the whole reason for the place in the comprehensive plan where it says we are charged with maintaining a separation between the business zone and the institutional educational zone. We're charged with that. So I don't think it's appropriate for us to disregard that. And the other thing that I have a pretty strong feelings about is and I believe it happened the last time too. It was not apparent that there needed to be a conditional use permit requested for the spaces, both in the Rockbridge building and in the Grand building. Somehow that was overlooked. But I don't think that, and therefore all of the work took place. X amount of money was spent to begin the renovations. But I do not believe that that is a good reason that we therefore allow it to take place without the proper permission having been sought first. I would hate to have spent the money myself, but that does not negate our responsibility to see this through and to follow the procedures. So,
thank you, Mary Stewart. Are there any other comments on council before we start going through the conditional use permit conditions of issuance? No? Okay. So just so you all understand, we've got these conditions of issuance that we are going to talk about. There are 6 of them, 5. And we'll go through them one at a time, just as Arnie suggested, and that will allow us to sort of hone in a little bit more on what the real concerns are. We don't always do it this way, but for issues that draw a lot of attention and seem very complicated, that's typically the way we approach it. So this is section 420-1-11. Okay, so the first one, item 1, conditional use permits may be issued for any of the uses for which a conditional use permit is required by the provision of this chapter. provided that the governing body, upon a recommendation by the planning commission, shall find that, okay, so here's the first one. The proposed use will not adversely affect, shall not affect adversely the health or safety of persons residing or working in the neighborhood of the proposed use. So staff believes that this condition is met. So are there any concerns? Anybody think that these conditions are not met? That, in other words, that this does adversely affect the health or safety of people residing or working in the neighborhood? Nope. Okay, so we're going to pass by that one. That one gets an okay. All right, the next item is the proposed use will not be detrimental to the public welfare or unduly injurious to property values or improvements in the neighborhood. This was referred to by one of our speakers. And I would agree that this is one of the items that we want to really spend some time thinking about. Does anybody have any thoughts about this particular item? So is it detrimental to the public welfare or unduly injurious to property values or improvements in the neighborhood? And I think Mary Stuart, your comment sort of got to this a little bit.
Are you referring to the availability of space for rent?
So unduly injurious to property values, for people wanting to, you know, whether maybe property values is not the right.
I would say we're allowed to, as far as for rents, we don't rent control. I mean, we want to see properties improved. We'd like to see this kind of investment in all of our properties, so that they're safe and they're good to live in, work in, that people, that they continue on, like Jeff was saying, for another 100 years, that they can survive. What is a concern is a loss of tax revenue. And in this case, W&L is the renter. And that's part of why the comprehensive plan was written like it was, that we strongly encourage W&L to program new construction within the present university bounds to preclude any further loss of local business and industry, as well as the loss of limited taxable land. That is what we want to prevent. We were given guidance by the city attorney that we can actually make that a consideration. If there's any concern that this building will sometime in the future get turned over to W&L, I would see if perhaps we could craft a third condition that says something to the effect of regarding the loss, that if we lose tax revenue, that the CUP is invalidated, if there's some legal way of putting that in, because we are allowed to consider that, but we're not allowed to consider who the user is.
Right.
You know, we don't get to pick and choose. I mean, for me personally, I'd rather have all mom and pop shops downtown, but we can't even decide that, you know, so I think having a business use in the non-Main Street, Washington Street fronting offices, I think that's a great use of that space. I was on, I guess I'm the only one on planning commission right now who was on planning commission when we did the comprehensive plan. I was on it throughout the whole process. And that really was the main thrust of it. We don't want them taking up additional land and taking it off the tax, taking out the tax rolls. Not so much not wanting them, period. I would have, but I like the fact that we're retaining 3 retail spaces. What we've seen is lately, if you've noticed, that some of the people who've bought buildings downtown and want to live upstairs are now limiting what is happening on the first floor. They don't want restaurants. They don't even want some retail. And that has really put us in a bind to lose those prime spots, street frontage spots. And that is not happening in this building. But as far as injury on this one issue, I don't see it being injurious to our property values or the improvements to the neighborhood. I think that the improvements are a good thing.
Arnie, could you define public welfare? for us in this particular use?
I think, to be quite honest, I think you just have to take that and make that decision on your own. I don't think there's a definition for public welfare for you. So it's each of you read that and have to make your own determination for your particular vote. I will, however, take the opportunity perhaps to jump to unduly injurious, because I thought that's what your question was going to be. As that's been explained to an attorney, not our attorney, but another attorney, the way that's been explained to me, it has to be really incredibly obvious, such as, I'm going to use an old example, a tannery that gets located next to a residential area. You don't want the smells and the awful industrial use that close. So something that's really obvious that would be a detriment to your property value, yes, that's something that would be unduly injurious to property values. But other things that just a claim that that use is going to reduce my property value, I have to sort of take that with a grain of salt.
Right. Okay. Any other thoughts on this one? Okay, so I think we're moving on and we're okay on item B. Moving on to item C, the proposed use will not be in conflict with the policies and principles of the city's adopted comprehensive plan. So this is thoughts, comments? Anybody?
I would like to say that, in my viewpoint, an office is an office, regardless of the tenant that is occupying that. People that come to that office typically work until 5, they leave. You know, they're not necessarily the residents. I would have loved to have seen the Grands building and the Rockridge building have residential opportunities. I think so many people in Lexington feel this way. I don't know why that was an option, but you know, this is where we are. But residents living in these buildings would be a fabric of the community. They would be immersed in the community. They wouldn't just be an office space. Someone comes to work and then they leave at 5. So I guess I would say that perhaps the city of Lexington needs to look at what percentage of the downtown we're going to allow to be offices versus restaurants, retail, other business opportunities, and whether it's W&O offices or it's VMI offices or it's law offices or insurance offices, there are a lot of offices, and that's not usually what brings people to the downtown to want to spend time and spend money.
Right.
And that's really, to me, the crux of the controversy here, not necessarily that, you know, this space will be occupied by W&O offices.
Right.
I think it's difficult when the wording says program new construction, like it's new, but it's not new. And so but based off of feeling.
Sorry, just to be clear, you're talking about the language in the
Yeah,
comprehensive
strongly
plan.
encourage W&L to program new construction.
So just, you want to read that out so that the audience knows what you're talking about.
From the comprehensive plan, it's land use 2.3, strongly encourage W&L to program new construction within the present university bounds to preclude any further loss of local business and industry, as well as the loss of limited taxable land. And it almost feels like that doesn't match how Lexington feels. Like that's where the wording gets stuck, is new construction. This isn't new construction, but that doesn't seem to be how everyone's feeling. So it's hard because it's like, if you look word for word, is it in conflict or is it not?
Right. And I think that given the extent of this construction, that one could say that it is, but it's also not Washingtonally doing the construction. This is a private interest with this construction, no matter how much percentage of it is new.
If I may, our Ernie has stated several times, and this was news to me, being a newer resident of Lexington. But if we were dealing with a tenant that John Adams had wanted to put in these buildings, that was an insurance company or a dental office, or it's by right. We wouldn't even be here, correct? So
correct.
the only discussion is that it's a university that wants to be the tenant in this particular office space.
Or that is requesting that it allow use of it if
Correct.
they don't technically have a tenant.
That is correct.
Well, he's saying that the basement.
Oh, yeah. No,
Most
I'm-
likely be copy.
Correct.
W&L Copy Center,
Mhm,
right,
mhm.
which.
You know what, at council, we had discussion on W&L's use of downtown and what we should allow and what we should not allow. And one of the issues that came up is, do you take the business use out of the definition because of exactly what you just said? Yep, it's by right for anybody else. But a strong reason to keep it in is to make sure that they don't own the property.
Correct.
So we don't lose the tax revenue, even though they do the pilot, the payment in lieu of taxes. But say it was VMI who doesn't do a pilot necessarily, or if it changed in the future. So it is, yeah, I think Dr. Ramey made the comment about, change your zoning if you don't want it that way. Which makes sense in some ways, except that then you lose that opportunity to make sure that we don't lose the tax revenue. That's the only way we can do it, is by keeping it within the CUP.
Right. Which speaks to the idea of having a third condition to any approval
Yeah.
that we give, having to do with the building remaining on the tax rolls, for example. Any other comments? Is anybody like absolutely feeling like this is in conflict with the comp plan? I know
Where the comp plan
Yeah.
states that W&L needs to stay on the campus, this does conflict with the comp plan.
Do you have Arnie, do you have a section for us on that, or could you read it out? The section that talks about the separation of the
Business zone and the institutional educational zone.
I can look that up. Do
Yeah.
you remember if that's in the land use chapter?
I don't remember right off the
I'm
top of
not
my head.
recalling
Sorry.
that one off the top of my head. So you can continue your discussion. I'll try to
Yes.
find it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Because I think that would be helpful to know. But again, the proposed use being office space. And I think that there is a discussion, a part of this discussion that really has to be elevated to council, in that we're talking about, why are we having this conversation, right? Is it just about taxes? Is it about that sort of feeling of, well, our downtown doesn't feel like our downtown anymore. Nobody, there's not that vibrancy that we've heard folks talking about. And I think that is something that council really is going to either have to discuss amongst themselves, or direct us to have that conversation, perhaps in the context of the comprehensive plan review that we'll be doing over the course of the year.
And I will take issue with the discussion on vibrancy. I mean, we're going to have at least three retail spaces downstairs. Having people, I don't care, again, doesn't matter who they are, but having people in offices downtown, I mean, that's what gets all these businesses through the slow time right now. And I don't think that gets acknowledged enough, as having that kind of foot traffic and just having people downtown. It's not our tourists who just make up our shoppers downtown. It's the residents and the people who work here, live and work here.
I totally agree with you. But I think that there is also something to the vibrancy, and this is sort of a, having people living downtown, to your, to your comment about residential people who are there in the evenings bringing activities is a really great thing to have. So,
And hypothetically, I mean, I know John is, and I love that he's promoting these storefronts, reserving them for retail space. But theoretically, they could be dental offices and law offices. I mean, there's nothing keeping that to be retail. So technically this whole building could be one compound of different offices, nothing to do with retail or restaurants or anything like that, with how our code is written.
Right. So Arnie, that's another, sorry to interrupt your flow of looking, but here's another question. Could we have an additional condition that would require that it be retail space down, in order to give this CUP, that those three storefronts, the two that are existing and the one on Washington Street that we're hopeful about, could we require that those be retail of some sort?
So for the conditional, if it were be approved as administrative facility for the educational facility, college, university use, that the remaining of the building remains as retail?
Yeah.
I'm struggling a little bit with that because I don't know what the impact of the administrative facilities is that you're trying to. So what's the impact of those going in that you're addressing that by requiring the retail stay? So the retail is already by right, so that's a benefit. He's already provided you with the diagram, and we've sort of codified that in a condition that says the request for administrative facilities is only in the lower part in the upper back, and therefore is not part of the second condition. Specifically, it does not apply to the retail spaces. So we at least have some comfort perhaps in that it's only going to be in a part, the approval is only being asked for a part of the building, basement and upper back. So I'm struggling a little bit with what's the impact of the use that would require you to require the rest of the building remain as retail.
So I would, this is an evolving thought, so bear with me. Taking what had been retail space and the taxes that go with that out of the picture, and then sort of saying this is now dedicated office space. So it would be a way of ensuring a tax, sort of, as opposed to an insurance office or whatever.
Yeah, I'm not so sure because
I don't know. I'm just exploring.
Last time we sort of had that conversation, somewhat similar in the sense that with parking, like this is adding an extra amount of parking demand, but we don't really tally parking downtown. We also don't tally taxes for each building downtown. So much was made last year and now you're changing it. So next year in the change format, it still has to meet that. So perhaps that's too finable point to consider.
Yeah.
And maybe is not in direct relation to the criteria that we have.
Right. So it would be something that we could recommend to Mr. Adamson, or request that he seriously consider keeping it in retail, but not something that we could require.
Correct. And we have already the provisions in the zoning ordinance for retail's a by right use as an example. And if this administrative facility that is connected to a university use, if that ever expands, it has to come right back through this public hearing process.
Right. But not the dental office.
Right.
Right.
We would have to change the ordinance.
I'm sorry.
We would have to change the ordinance,
That's
the
correct.
comprehensive plan to
That is
to
correct.
address that. at a
This
different time.
figure, it's labeled retail space. It seems that this is sort of to give us comfort a little bit about the use of the other spaces as non-retail. Is this going to be part of the approval? This figure?
Yes, sir. What we did to the best of our ability, because we wouldn't necessarily, we could reference that, but that's why we wrote conditions 1, the staff recommended conditions number 1 and number 2 the way we did. So yes, I think the answer to your question is yes.
Thank you.
Is it restaurant, coffee shop? Is that retail? I mean, I think we get in a big
Right,
trouble trying to say, I would love to see more restaurants downtown and Lex Coffee have a place to go, and these would be nice spots, but
Right.
I think it gets to be a big problem at planning commission. If we start to say we want this many retail spots downtown, I think the market will drive that, and that will work itself out. We only have a limited capacity on retail space, and I don't think it should be set by us. I think it should be driven by market conditions. but I understand your point as far as keeping it active, the storefronts, keeping them active
Right.
spaces.
And I would actually take some issue with that. I think that the role of the planning commission and city council is to in fact provide some direction as opposed to just letting the market forces
Yeah. And
play out.
we have, as far as living residences and hotels, we don't allow them to occupy the first floors.
Right. But I know that when I was a kid growing up here, there were times when all of, it's like there was just like so many offices that were occupying the front build of those stores, because there weren't enough stores. Or people bought, either bought or rented those spaces and then they put in an office, and it was just not that great. And, people didn't want to be downtown, and then Lexington Main Street came in, and so, which is just to say that I think there is a role to play in being directive. So, okay, so back to the item C. So the proposed use will, I'm just reading it again. The proposed use will not be in conflict with the policies and principles of the city's adopted comprehensive plan. I'm sorry, Arnie, were you able to find that section that Mary Stewart was?
Could not find anything quickly, and I just went through quickly the land use strategies, the ones in the local economy section, and could not find anything that says that ties or has that sort of connection between the institutional and the commercial uses of what I believe you said.
Okay, well,
Good
thank
not.
you. Thank you for looking. Any other thoughts on this item C? Are we feeling like there's like teeth here? I don't think so. Okay. All right. So we are going to move on to D. Adequate public services, including streets and other traffic ways, utilities, police and fire protection are or reasonably will be available to support the proposed use. And I do want to just make a comment about parking. Parking has been an issue that we have talked about a lot in Planning Commission. For those of you in the audience who are not usually here, we talk about it all the time. Whether there is enough parking, whether, and can we require parking? And the answer is that it is, as Arnie said, something that the city provides. It is not something that we can require of our applicants to provide additional parking to what is available on the street. So that is not something that we can at all consider. So I do appreciate it. I know that it feels like there's not enough parking. But I also understand that, we have not been doing parking enforcement. And so people have tended to leave their cars in parking spots for long periods of time. I've noticed that our parking enforcement car has been driving around. So I'm hoping that some of those issues will be addressed. And then, so I'll take it back to council now. Is there anybody have any comments about this one or concerns about this item? Okay. All right. So moving on to number 3, in granting any conditional use permit, the governing body shall give due consideration to factors relevant to the findings required by subsection C1 and 2. C1 is what we just went over, and C2 is not.
I can read it into the
Okay,
record if you
sure.
all
That would
prefer
probably be
what that
good
means.
practice.
I found it, Arnie. You want me to read it?
Oh, yeah, please.
That'd be
Sorry,
great.
I'm slow.
Where the provisions of this chapter require conditional use permits for certain parking lots, drive-in and or drive-through facilities in the C or C2 zoning districts, due consideration shall be given in addition to the findings contained in subsection C1 of this section to the purposes of the districts and specifically to the effect of such facilities on the use of off-street circulation ways, including use of alleys, on the location of access points in relationship to traffic and pedestrian flow. So has to do with flow of traffic. waiting area, drive-in facilities. Additionally, in the review of such facilities in the C1 zoning district, due consideration shall be given to the effect of such facilities on the historic pattern of buildings and on the maintenance of a compact, efficient, and attractive retail facade and arrangement of buildings.
Thank you. Okay. Does anybody have any thought, any concerns about items? Okay. All right, moving on to number 3, or reading the rest of number 3, as well as any, sorry, I'm just going to start over again. In granting any conditional use permit, the governing body shall give due consideration to factors relevant to the findings required by subsection C1, which was the first 4 items, plus C2, which Commissioner Harlow just read, as well as to any other reasonable land use and zoning considerations as may be required by the nature of the proposed use, or as may be otherwise appropriate to effectuate the intent of this chapter. And the governing body shall designate such conditions as it deems necessary to carry out the intent of this chapter. The application for such conditional use permit shall be accompanied by such written and graphic materials as may be necessary to enable the planning commission and the governing body to make recommendation and findings set forth. So this is where we're talking about the conditions that, and is there anything else that we need to sort of, okay. So we've talked about, so staff has made 2 recommendations and we've talked about a third one. The first condition is that only the basement level below the Main Street storefronts and that portion of the building behind the Main Street storefronts and above the Washington Street storefront may be utilized for administrative facilities related to the educational facility, college, university use. I have a question about this. Given that there is not currently a storefront on Washington Street, do we need to make some caveat that assuming that this is built?
I think it's helpful because then you know what portion this can't go into because there's going to be that retail storefront on both the Washington and Main Street sides.
So we're issued, I mean, the condition is written as if this Washington Street storefront is extant, but it is not. So sorry, I just want to be clear. Do we need to?
I don't think it's problematic because we already have an application in for the Architectural Review Board as an example. Next week, it's in the staff packet that goes out tomorrow for that storefront facade as well as the few more facade treatments on the Main Street side. So it may not be approved today, but we expect it to be approved pretty darn soon.
So how about if we wrote the proposed Washington Street storefront?
Or even Washington Street frontage. Yeah, either one, either future or storefront or Washington Street frontage, because isn't all the Washington Street frontage? I guess maybe there's a little section that might be office.
Yes.
In regards to this issue, again, I come to this graphic, and I wonder if we could make the graphic condition.
Yes, you can. You could perhaps add to what's already there and in other words, what's there in staff recommended condition number 1, and it add to the end as shown in the or in conformance with the applicant's graphic or in conformance with the application provided.
To the ARB?
No, this.
Oh, you mean, yes.
I
Gotcha.
think
Yep.
The intent is to reference this so that even though we may have done a poor job in crafting the condition, if we make a reference to the graphic or the application in a whole, then we will at least have some better understanding of where the uses are being approved.
Mhm. I think that makes sense to me. So that only the basement level below the Main Street storefronts and that portion of the building behind the Main Street storefronts and above the proposed Washington Street storefront as represented in the
Diagram.
and the figure diagram.
Graphic provided by the applicant.
Is that part of the application? Can you just say application?
As
In the axonometric diagram.
provided by the applicant.
I read that off of, I don't know what that means, but I read it off of this diagram. I'm sorry. Okay. Diagram provided by applicant. Okay. May be utilized for administrative facilities related to the educational facility, college, university use. So that's the first condition.
And I would like to just throw out another possible way to word that.
Mhm.
Since at this point, only the basement has been offered or leased to W&L. I think it bears consideration that we allow for that and not the other space, since that's what has already been agreed to.
Right.
And then
that's,
and then somebody like a another retail or services person would perhaps have an opportunity. So we don't have to do the whole space. We could just do what has been already, I guess, agreed to by W&L.
right. And that was the question I asked Arnie earlier, but you were saying that we should not do that. Could you, expand on that?
The applicant is requesting consideration for both of those. I'm not really all that certain that the fact that he doesn't have a lease currently is much of an impact. He's asking for us to review and assess the impacts from those two uses according to the criteria we have. So I'm not sure how he not having a lease currently for that upper back would violate the criteria that we just went over.
Right.
It allows perhaps other local businesses to have an opportunity for that space, because that's quite a large space, quite a large space.
If we approve this today, that still doesn't mean, like, it is approved for educational use, but like she could still have her therapist practice there. It's not saying it has to be. It's just the option is available. Is that correct?
Yes.
That
It has-
is correct.
And then my understanding, it has not been renovated yet, that part of the building. Okay. Okay.
Anybody else want to weigh in on this one? I hear what you're saying. I do. And there's not a real, we've already gone through the conditions and it sort of meets all of the conditions. So I think we would be hard pressed to not agree without a clear statement of why. You know what I mean? Do you understand what I mean?
I take issue with it not being in that part of the comprehensive plan, not being in agreement where W&L remains on their campus. So I still
The
take issue with that.
separation, right, that you were talking about that Arnie was not able to find. Thank you, whoever said that. Could you look for that, Arnie, again? I'm sorry.
Oh, so we're talking about, okay, that we're now in the text. So I was quickly looking through the strategies, thinking it was in the strategy.
Mhm.
Okay, so on page 83, there's not much here, so I'll read it. Partnerships and initiatives subsection in the land use chapter. W&L is currently undertaking a significant campus master planning effort, the adoption of which is subject to the city review and approval, In considering such proposals, the city will continue to encourage W&L to look within its present holdings for future growth rather than acquiring additional land. Not only would additional expansion further erode the city's tax base, removal of viable commercial activities from an already limited downtown is harmful to the health and vigor of this vital commercial district. The university owns most, but not all of the houses in the block bounded by Glasgow, Nelson, and McLaughlin Streets and adjacent to the university's Lenfest Center for the Arts and Gaines Hall. Any proposed redevelopment of this block should mimic the scale and architecture of adjacent historic homes. So that's just the triangle.
Right. So basically that's talking about Washington and Lee University acquiring property, not renting property. So I would say to the audience that again, this is something that is going to have to be elevated to council. And that's going to have to come back to us, for future issues to be considered. That's how I read that. Does that sound accurate? Okay, so anybody else want to? No? Okay. So item number, the second condition that the storefronts facing Main Street and Washington Street are not subject to this conditional use permit. Meaning that they are not allowed to be rented to Washington and Lee University or VMI. And then the third item would be one related to, that's not on here, that Leslie was talking about and that you and I have talked about, is is having to do with the tax rolls, of keeping the property on the tax rolls, and whether that is the actual entirety of the property or whether it could be related to the uses. Go ahead.
I would think you would want to tie it to the uses that are being approved. So something perhaps to the effect, the approved conditional use permit for the educational facility is only valid so long as the property remains on the tax roll.
Okay. And is there a, so Mr. Adamson would be receiving rent money, I assume, from Washington and Lee? If yes. Well, one never knows. So just want to make sure. So that would be taxable income to him. Yes. And then also real estate tax.
I think what we're focusing on is the real estate portion.
Sure.
Of it. But yes.
But there is a section that, wow, I read about keeping things on the roll in terms of the businesses and keeping the businesses on that property in the tax rolls. And wow.
I'm not the commissioner of revenue, but there is beat poll tax. There are other taxes, certainly.
Okay.
I think what we're trying for the most part is the real estate portion of
Sure.
it, the property tax.
Is that the biggest concern for council?
Yes, right. And that was the only one we talked about as far with our city attorney is we can
can
put
require that.
conditions on that, right?
Okay. So I would say, I'm sorry, Arnie, would you read your suggestion again?
Something to the effect for a third proposed condition is the approved conditional use permit for the educational facility use is only valid so long as the property remains on the tax roll.
And is there any way in which the property could be split? Do we need to say 100% of the property? I'm just wondering.
I think I don't know, but I think we're comfortable with just saying that the property remains on the tax roll. So then if there is any sort of split, then we have to sort of figure that out. But I think the intent is there that it has to stay on the tax roll, the whole property, while those approved uses remain on the property.
So could we add then 100% of the property? Just to be super clear. What do you all think about this condition?
Oh, that's important.
Yeah.
Important. Yeah.
Mayor Stewart.
I don't think it makes a big difference whether it's 100% or it just stays that states that the property remains on the property on the tax rolls.
But in terms of the third condition,
Yeah.
you're good. Okay. Okay. Is there anyone else who wants to have their say about it on council? I mean, sorry, on commission. Anybody else who wants to have their say, have any questions? Before we close discussion and stand for a motion? No. Okay, then I think that I am waiting for a motion.
I'll dive in. I move to approve conditional use permit number CUP 2025-03 to allow portions of the Grand Building, tax map number 23-1-70, to be used for administrative facilities related to the educational facility, college/university use with the 3 staff recommended conditions.
And do we need to read those into the,
Recover those.
do I have a second?
I second.
Okay, and I think that it's worth having a roll call vote. Do you take the roll call or should I?
I can.
Okay. Please.
Commission Member Bates,
Aye.
Commission Member Anderson,
Aye.
Commission Member Hall,
Aye.
Commission Member Stewart,
Harlow,
Harlow, sorry,
nay.
apologize for that. Commission Members Strawn,
Aye.
Chair.
Aye. And the motion carries 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to 1. All right. Congratulations to Mr. Anderson. Wow, we're it's Adamson. I'm so sorry. Thank you all, members of the audience. Your care and concern for our community is noted, and I think members of our commission are right there with you. I really encourage you to show up at council meetings, to write letters to the editor, to get involved. This community is very near and dear to every one of us. And so thank you for coming out tonight. And we are going to move on to the next item on the agenda. And you're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting if you would like to. All right, so other business, zoning and planning report.
I have no zoning or planning report.
Okay, city council report.
I don't have a report. We're going to actually meet after this to discuss Morse Creek Dam and gosh, it's been a long day now. I forgot.
City Hall.
Oh, and City Hall renovations.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I will now entertain a movement to adjourn.
So moved.
And do I have a second?
Second.
Was there a second?
Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.